Good morning and welcome to the joint meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means and Senate Committee on Finance. Committee Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Canizero. Senator Dondero Loop. Senator Goycochea. Senator Harris. Senator Neal. Senator Wynn. Senator Severs-Ganser. Senator Titus. Assemblywoman Anderson. Assemblywoman Backus. Assemblywoman Brown-May. Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblywoman Gorlo. Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Howdegi. Assemblywoman Kasama. Assemblyman Miller. Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblywoman Peters. Assemblyman Watts. Assemblyman Yeager. Chair Monroe Moreno.
And I am here. Will you please mark Assemblyman Yeager and Senator Harris present when they arrive? We have members that are presenting bills. Members, we have one item on our agenda today. It's a report from the subcommittee, budget closing for K-12 education. And with that, we will get started. Good morning. You can get started whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the committees. Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal, for the record. I am joined by my colleague, Mr. Adam Drost, this morning, and we are part of the K-12 team for the Fiscal Analysis Division, along with our colleague, Ms. Liliana Camacho-Poco, who could not be here this morning. The committees closed the Nevada Department of Education operating budgets earlier this week, and this morning I will be providing an overview on the subcommittee closing report for the Nevada Department of Education K-12 budgets. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education, CIP, has completed its review of certain budgets for K-12 education in the executive budget for the 2023-25 biennium, which include the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account, other state education programs, professional development programs, Teach Nevada Scholarship Program, the 1/5 Retirement Credit Purchase Program, and the account for state special education services. The subcommittee also completed its review of the Education Stabilization Account, which was not included in the executive budget. The subcommittee recommendations result in a decrease of general fund appropriations totaling $169.3 million in fiscal year 2024, and an increase of general fund appropriations totaling $183.3 million in fiscal year 2025. The following highlights the more significant closing recommendations of the subcommittee. The Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account, Budget Account 2609. The subcommittee recommended approval of total funding of $5.477 billion in fiscal year 2024 and $5.720 billion in fiscal year 2025 for the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan, which is an increase from the total funding of $5.322 billion in fiscal year 2024 and $5.556 billion in fiscal year 2025 recommended in the executive budget. This increase of $318.5 million is reflective of updated consensus revenue projections prepared by the Fiscal Analysis Division in the Governor's Finance Office, as well as a projected balance forward of $291.4 million from fiscal year 2023 into fiscal year 2024 in the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account that was not reflected in the executive budget. The subcommittee recommended only a slight increase in general fund appropriations of $5.3 million over the 2023-25 biennium for the plan when compared to the amounts recommended by the governor. This increase was due to the subcommittee approving general fund appropriations of $5.3 million over the 2023-25 biennium, recommended for a dual language pilot program, but transferring the funding to the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account to provide additional funding for the plan. In total, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $2.626 billion over the 2023-25 biennium, compared to $2.621 billion recommended by the governor. The subcommittee recommended the full money committees request a bill draft to amend NRS 555.470 to require fine revenue related to the application of pesticides that is currently distributed to school districts by the Department of Agriculture to instead be deposited in the State Education Fund and reflecting the projected annual fine revenue of $11,000 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium in the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account. The subcommittee recommended the bill draft also amend NRS 387-1212 to reflect the Department of Agriculture fines in all other revenue currently provided to the State Education Fund. The subcommittee recommended the following items related to expenditures from the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account: approving the revised amounts for food service funding, transportation funding, and local funding to support pupils with disabilities, as provided by the Nevada Department of Education; approving the governor's recommendation to continue only providing transportation funding to school districts in the 2023-25 biennium; approving the statewide base per pupil funding amounts of $8,966 in fiscal year 2024 and $9,414 in fiscal year 2025, which were increases from the statewide base per pupil funding amounts recommended by the governor of $8,596 in fiscal year 2024 and $9,023 in fiscal year 2025. Reflecting updated pupil enrollment counts in the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan model based on revised information provided by the Nevada Department of Education, which reflect projected enrollment of 471,283 in fiscal year 2024 and 471,754 in fiscal year 2025, and not approving the governor's recommended application of the Nevada Cost of Education Index and instead applying an index of 1.0 for all counties, which would effectively eliminate the effect of the index for the 2023-25 biennium as recommended by the Commission on School Funding. Not approving the governor's recommendation for weighted funding and instead approving weighted funding of 0.45 for English learner pupils, 0.35 for at-risk pupils identified using the grad score, and 0.12 for gifted and talented pupils. Based on the subcommittee's action, the following funding amounts were recommended for approval: $212.5 million in fiscal year 2024 and $223.2 million in fiscal year 2025 for English learner pupils, $198.7 million in fiscal year 2024 and $208.6 million in fiscal year 2025 for at-risk pupils, $8 million in fiscal year 2024 and $8.4 million in fiscal year 2025 for gifted and talented pupils. Revising NRS 387-1214 and NRS 387-12455, effective July 1, 2023, to define the rate of inflation for the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan as the average percentage increase or decrease for the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, West Region, all items as published by the United States Department of Labor for the immediately preceding 3 calendar years. Approving the governor's recommendation to provide pupils enrolled in online school district schools with the adjusted base per pupil amount. Providing the Nevada Department of Education with authority in the 2023 K-12 Education Funding Bill to update its fiscal year 2025 weighted funding amounts based on October 1, 2023 enrollment counts. The subcommittee also recommended a letter of intent be issued by the full committees directing the department to work with the Commission on School Funding to study and recommend changes to the Nevada Cost of Education Index, so a cost adjustment factor may be applied to the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan in future biennia as specified in NRS 387-1215. Study the effect and develop recommendations on providing school districts receiving fiscal year 2020 baseline funding with the statewide base per pupil funding amount for their online schools, and study the grad score and its effectiveness in identifying at-risk pupils. The next budget, other state education programs, budget account 2699. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for a new dual language pilot program in the 2023-25 biennium, consistent with the 2021 legislature's intent to limit the number of K-12 categorical programs. Instead, the subcommittee recommended transferring the general fund appropriations of $2.6 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium that was to be provided for the pilot program as recommended in Budget Amendment A23-254-2699 to the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account to provide additional funding for the plan. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended the full committees issue a letter of intent directing the department and the Commission on School Funding to study whether it would be an allowable use of funds by school districts and charter schools to utilize English learner weighted funding to establish and operate dual language programs or determine the legislative changes to do so. determine the recommended weight that would be required if a new dual language program weight was to be established, and report their findings to the Interim Finance Committee by August 1st, 2024, for possible consideration as the executive budget for the 2025-27 biennium is developed. Although not reflected in the executive budget, the subcommittee also recommended additional general fund appropriations of $314,293 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for the Jobs for Nevada's Graduates program, with the funding placed in reserves. Upon approval of the Interim Finance Committee and demonstration that matching funds have been secured, the funding would be eligible to be transferred from reserves for use by the Jobs for Nevada's Graduates program. The next budget Account 2618, Professional Development Programs, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $327,696 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to restore the regional professional development programs to pre-pandemic funding levels. The next budget, Teach Nevada Scholarship Program, Budget Account 2718, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation of general fund appropriations of $3.2 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to increase funding for the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program, but recommended this be appropriated as restricted funding to the Interim Finance Committee for possible allocation once additional information regarding the success of the program, reconciliation of program funding, and possible legislative changes are considered. The subcommittee also provided the department with direction that should it wish to continue this increased program funding in the 2025-27 biennium, it could request funding through an enhancement decision unit in which it can demonstrate various successes for the program. Additionally, the subcommittee provided fiscal staff with authority to include enabling language in the 2023 K-12 education funding bill. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $6.8 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to establish a new incentivizing Pathways to Teaching grant program. The subcommittee also recommended to include the following provisions as part of its recommendation: that the full money committees request a bill draft to amend Nevada revised statutes by incorporating revisions to allow for the incentivizing Pathways to Teaching grant program. Any program funding remaining at the end of the 2023-25 biennium reverts to the general fund through language included in the 2023 K-12 education funding bill. The program be transferred and housed within the department's other state education programs budget, a reverting budget that does not earn interest. The Nevada Department of Education be directed to remove this program from the adjusted base budget when preparing its budget for the 2025-27 biennium, and request the program continue through an enhancement decision unit if the department wishes the program to continue. The next budget, Account for State Special Education Services, Budget Account 2619. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $233.1 million in fiscal year 2024 and $237.5 million in fiscal year 2025 for the state special education program, which includes $13.1 million over the 2023-25 biennium to fund 2% roll-up costs, inclusive of technical adjustments. Although not reflected in the executive budget, the subcommittee also recommended additional general fund appropriations of $11.1 million in fiscal year 2024 and $13.8 million in fiscal year 2025 for the state special education program to provide a minimum level of state special education funding. The additional funds are projected to provide a minimum per pupil amount for targeted school districts, charter schools, and the University School for Profoundly Gifted Pupils. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended that the full committees issue a letter of intent directing the department and the Commission on School Funding to study the state special education program and to target weighted multipliers similar to the Commission on School Funding's recommended weighted multipliers of 0.50 for English learners, 0.30 for at-risk pupils, and 0.14 for gifted and talented pupils, and report its findings as well as the findings of the review and study of the current distribution methodology for state special education funding to be completed by WestEd to the Interim Finance Committee by August 1st, 2024, for possible consideration as the executive budget for the 2025-27 biennium is developed. The next budget, the Education Stabilization Account, Budget Account 2608. Although not included in the executive budget, the subcommittee provided various recommendations for the Education Stabilization Account, including reflecting this account in the 2023 K-12 education funding bill. By doing so, this account would be subject to the provisions of the State Budget Act, including Interim Finance Committee review and approval in certain circumstances. The subcommittee recommended approving the fiscal year 2023 revenue and expenditure projections that would provide funding of $826.2 million for the education stabilization account and a balance forward of $291.4 million into the pupil-centered funding plan at the beginning of fiscal year 2024. The subcommittee also recommended approving the Governor's Finance Office and the Office of the State Treasurer interest revenue projections, which would provide the account with interest revenue of $25.6 million in fiscal year 2024 and $27.2 million in fiscal year 2025. The subcommittee recommended revising NRS 387-1213 through passage of AB 458 from the 2023 legislative session or other enabling legislation to allow funding from the Education Stabilization Account to be used to provide advances to the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account if needed for cash flow purposes. In addition, the subcommittee recommended statutory changes to allow the pupil-centered funding plan to be eligible for advances from the general fund with interim finance committee approval, if necessary, and only if advances from the education stabilization account would not provide the necessary cash flow for payments. The subcommittee also recommended revising NRS 387-1213 to allow the interim finance committee to transfer funding from the education stabilization account to the state education fund if there are any reductions in the collection of non-general fund revenue in the pupil-centered funding plan account. Finally, the subcommittee recommended revising NRS 387-1213, beginning October 1, 2023, to increase the Education Stabilization Account cap from 15% of all appropriations and authorizations from the State Education Fund, excluding the Education Stabilization Account for the prior fiscal year, to 20% of all appropriations and authorizations for the prior fiscal year. The subcommittee recommended closing the following budget as recommended by the Governor, the 1/5 Retirement Credit Purchase Program Budget Account 2616. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for that closing report. And with that, I'll accept a motion to approve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would so move.
I have a motion from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Bacchus. Discussion? Senator Ganser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate all the work that staff has done and the many hearings that we've had on this topic. You know, in reviewing what was approved the other day and then looking at the AB 400, which is actually sitting in Assembly Ways and Means, I did not understand that the $291 million that was excess from this last biennium or current biennium, that we made a decision that was recommended to roll into the pupil-centered funding plan, that money was specifically intended to fund a couple of things that appeared in AB 400, early childhood literacy and readiness, and also the teacher pipeline. And in AB 400, there were two accounts that were created that point back to the overflow money that we discussed the other day. And when you look at the $291 million, which is what we're talking about, that money would increase the base, which is good. We want to put more money in education. All this is dedicated to education, but at the same time, it creates a higher bar than originally anticipated. And we have about $2 billion or so that is already going into K through 12 education, specifically into the funding formula. And so I'm not going to be able to support the motion, but I also, I started out talking about staff and some of the things that we did do. Catching up the special education dollars is really important. I understand those are one shot and that we're trying to get to the average so that a public school or a public charter school have the same type of funding per student, and that's going to fluctuate partially on enrollment and per enrollment projections, and also shifting the weight to make sure that we're covering the English language learners and the at-risk students, I think is really important. But going back to, I meant to start with that, but going back to the issue around the early childhood literacy and readiness account that's supposed to be created, and also the teacher pipeline account, I think those two are very critical. And when we think about how our students are doing in school, if we are all hands on deck and we really put funding that's required into early literacy, it will change the trajectory of our students from then on. My understanding is it's a 5-year program to really address this. So the first cohort are probably pre-K right now, so to make sure that they can read by 3rd grade. So therefore, while I supported the motion to use the overflow dollars the other day, the $291 million, for that to go into the pupil-centered funding plan, I think prioritizing the early childhood literacy and readiness account, and given the shortage that we have with teachers, the teacher pipeline account are extremely important. So I'm not going to be able to support the motion at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And I did not serve on this subcommittee, so I'm still going through all of this information. But when I look over it, if I'm understanding correctly, and again, I'm just now looking over it, there's a significant increase. We're talking, if I just were to look at the narrative on page 3, $370 increase per student funding, which is directly related to the recommendations from the Commission on School Funding. And then I continue to look through the narrative, and there's, the subcommittee definitely heard about the issue when it comes to making sure that all counties are being treated equally with the weighted area that are coming. And then when I even look at page 36, which has the per pupil breakdown of this graph, and again, it is a 21.5% increase in year one. 21.5%, I'm sorry. My mind's still blown from that and in my other world of what that would look like. And then there's also discussion about everything else. I'm confused by the comments about why people would be upset about giving money to our schools and why we are upset about investing in our students and in our counties. And so I'm just very confused, and I'm still trying to work through that. But I appreciate the work that has gone into this, and more importantly, I appreciate the fact that there's more than 20%, more than that. Year one, it's 21.5, excuse me. And year, it looks like a 26.7, and then it continues to go up. So I'm confused by why some people would be upset about investing in the most important area of our state, which are the children that live in it. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I make an additional comment, please?
Go ahead.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. So I want to make it clear that all these money, all the dollars are going through K-12. It's just whether we have a separate bucket for early child literacy and the teacher pipeline or not. We agree that we want to add money to education, and we have record amounts that will be added. It's, $2 billion plus. And we're talking about specifically $291 million to make sure that our kids have a chance of reading by third grade, starting with an early literacy program, and then also looking at the teacher pipeline, because we hear time and time again. So I misunderstood the intent of that money in the tie to AB 400, and that's why I supported it the other day. But overall, I clearly, and my colleagues clearly support funding education in a significant manner, but we want to make sure there's money set aside specifically to make sure our kids have a chance to read by third grade, because the long-term outcomes for our entire K through 12 system will change if we fund that appropriately. And we also recognize the shortage of teachers and the frustration that they're experiencing in the classroom, and we want to make sure that is also addressed. So there's no frustration around or being upset about funding education. It's just making sure that those two programs are also funded, and it all goes to K-12. No money will be redirected somewhere else. It all goes through K-12, but those buckets are really important. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to put on the record that we didn't forget about our pre-K to 12 students this session. I believe we accepted the governor's recommendation of putting $30 million towards that, in addition to providing more money towards additional seats in pre-K this year. I was trying to pull up my notes. I didn't quickly do it because it's a separate budget that we did here. But we did put money. We redirected extra ARP money into pre-K, so it was something we did not forget about this session, and I'm really happy with what we did with that, and happy that we have the revenue this year to go ahead and support K through 12 education and start moving forward away from categorical spending. And by read by 3, we're going to end up having the K through 12 funding for those that are in kindergarten through third grade. They'll have extra resources through the additional monies put in the fund.
Thank you. Speaker Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Frankly, I'm a little confused in terms of what's happening here because we had a subcommittee meeting on Tuesday, and I think we pretty thoroughly vetted the AB 400 issue, which was twofold. One, that was the use of interest income, which I think we all agreed wasn't a stable funding source because of the cash flow issues that are going to happen with the stabilization account. But if I'm not mistaken, I think everyone on this committee, with perhaps one or two exceptions, was in agreement that the 4 programs in AB 400, one of which is the teacher pipeline, were worthy of discussion and potentially worthy of funding, but that funding shouldn't come from an unstable funding source, because if that funding source decreased, we would have to pull the rug from under those programs. And I think the comment was made that we were trying to figure out how to right-size those programs. And the committee vote, I believe, was close to unanimous. And so I don't know what's happened between now and then, but it sounds to me like the criticism is we put $291 million more into the pupil-centered funding formula, which to me is a crazy criticism that we would make, that we overfunded public education when we know it's chronically underfunded in the state. And I will also note that Assembly Bill 400, at the governor's request, was given a waiver and continues to live. So it was not subject to the deadlines at the governor's request, and we're still having those conversations. But to somehow suggest that a supporting of nearly a 26% increase to the pupil-centered funding formula and the $291 million extra dollars that went into education is somehow an affront to education, I don't understand that. It would be an affront to me not to approve this kind of funding. So I don't know what happened in the last 2 days, but I think the conversation we had in this committee, the subcommittee on Tuesday, was very clear that there was a way forward to make both of these things happen. So it is what it is, but I am proud of the work that the subcommittee did, that the staff did, to be able to historically fund education in this state. And of course those other programs are important, but that's what the next 3.5 weeks are for. And everybody sitting here knows the state has the money to make those programs happen, to make sure we have qualified educators in every classroom, to make sure we're developing the pipeline. Those conversations are going to happen. That's not the decision before this committee today. The decision for this committee today is, are we going to approve a 26% increase in education, public education funding over the last biennium, as well as a significant increase in special education funding? And I sure hope that everyone in this committee would see the value in that and would vote yes on this.
Any other comments? Senator Canizero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think that the speaker definitely probably said it better than I will. I'll add just 2 more points. First and foremost, this $291 million is money that resides in the pupil-centered funding plan, doesn't relate to the interest pieces. Again, I would reiterate the speaker's comments regarding Assembly Bill 400, which, by the way, was also part of the discussions, and I believe I even asked a question about that during the subcommittee closing. The other piece of this that I think is baffling to me is that we continue to have conversations about how this funding is great for public education, but the Commission on School Funding that has done a very comprehensive job of looking at funding overall in public education is not recommending that we simply put in what we are putting in now. It is what we have, and I think that we owe it to our students to give them the right education, to put funding behind that so that they can excel in the classrooms, because that is one of the best investments that we can make. That somehow now, in the context of even putting this $291 million in, isn't enough to get us to where we would really ideally love to be, that now we're going to have a conversation about not putting this money into education is something that I cannot wrap my mind around. And so I will be strongly supporting this motion because I think it was the right thing to do. We had this exact conversation 2 days ago, and everyone agreed. So I appreciate the speaker's comments and will be supporting the motion, and thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, for one, on that committee was a no. And the reason I was a no was because this is my 5th session on a money committee, and every session we have put more money into education. One of the things that the Commission on Funding did show is that we keep putting more money into education and we didn't improve any outcomes. And so I am supportive of putting more money into education, but I think we need to look at different ideas on how we use that money and different programs. So I cannot support this. Throwing more money at this problem, is, as we saw from the Commission of Education, doesn't solve the outcomes. I think we have to have dedicated programs. I think Read by 3 is one of the classic ones that did work. And unless we see some absolute signs that this money is going to be truly used and not just go into collective bargaining, although I feel our teachers need an increase in salary, this money goes into one pot and it's all subject to collective bargaining. So I will say throwing more money at the problem is not going to solve this problem. So I am going to be a no.
Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I concur with what the Speaker and the Majority Leader have said. I chaired that committee that day, and I totally understood what we were doing. And when people say, whether it's on this committee, in the newspaper, or out in the community, that we shouldn't throw more money at education, I would suggest we have never thrown money at education. I would suggest that our teachers are working hard. And I would suggest that this isn't about collective bargaining. This is about a program that is a pupil-centered funding account. It is about professional development. It's about Teach Nevada Scholarship Program. It's about JAG. It's about the Education Stabilization Account. It's not about throwing money at education. So with that, Madam Chair, I will be a yes.
Thank you. So everyone knows we're a fiscal committee, and our first responsibility on this committee is to fund education. And in the last 2 legislative sessions, we have made record increases to our education, our K-12 education funding. And as one of my colleagues said, and still we're not at the numbers ideally we would like to be at, but we have an opportunity today to close this budget and ensure that it's not a 5% increase, a 10% increase, but it's literally a 26.7% increase to education. There's a separate bill, totally separate bill, AB 400, that's currently sitting in the Assembly Ways and Means Committee that has absolutely nothing to do with this funding. There's other funding mechanisms that we can address those programs that are within those that would help with the outcomes, but today, our decision, our responsibility is to fund K-12 education, period. And we're doing that, again, at record numbers. Not where we want to be, but a lot closer than where we were last session and the session before that. So with that, we have a motion on the floor to approve this closing report. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, and raise your hand. We have a nay from Senator Ganser, Senator Gokachia, Senator Titus, Assemblywoman Kasama, Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Dickman, and Assemblyman O'Neill. The motion passes, and thank you all for helping us do our job in funding K-12 education. And thank you so much for the report. Members, that is the only thing on our agenda for today. The last thing we have is public comment. If there's anyone here in Carson City that would like to make public comment, I invite you to the table. If there's anyone in Las Vegas, I think I see one person there that would like to make public comment, please come up to the table, fill in all the chairs. And if you are joining us and you'd like to call in for public comment, that number is 888-475-4499. And our meeting ID for today is 885-9066-0568, and then press pound. And we will start here in Carson City. You have 2 minutes. Please remember to turn on your mic and state and spell your name for the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. We've come to testify in front of the subcommittees and the money committees on many occasions. You've heard from many of our members working in classrooms and on school sites about their struggles. We've submitted written comment, and I won't read that again. But I will say that the action taken by the committee in closing this budget is progress, is movement in the right direction. We just think more needs to be done, and we believe that the legislature, the state, has the capacity to do more. So in your closing, you heard that the actual general fund contribution from the state to education from this fiscal year to next fiscal year is actually going to decrease. I forget the exact number. It's $160-something million or in that range. You have reserves, which are not even record reserves. They're completely unprecedented. The state has the potential to reach close to $3 billion in reserves between the state rainy day fund and the education stabilization account with caps lifted. I think we're looking at 2.8, 2.9, maybe even if revenues continue to be strong, $3 billion in reserves. The previous largest reserves that this state has ever had is $401 million. Now, $401 million may not be enough in terms of fiscal responsibility. But the difference between $401 million and 2.8 or $2.9 billion is a massive difference. So while it's raining in Nevada schools, we appreciate the increases that have come, but there is great need and there is capacity here at the state to meet at least some, if not all of that need. As you wrap up this session, we would encourage you to consider this and consider moving the ball even further than you did this morning. Thank you very much.
You can go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. I'm Jenny Angus, Angius. I am the Executive Director of a Reno-based nonprofit. This is my very first time testifying, so I just wanted to share a little bit about our organization today. Urban Roots, since 2009, has been changing the way our community eats and learns through garden-based education. Urban Roots utilizes next-generation science standards, aligned curriculum, and we offer comprehensive garden education programming. Urban Roots currently builds school gardens for the Washoe County School District. We provide field trips to our urban teaching farm to complement lessons that are being taught in the classroom, and we host educational farm camp programming during the Washoe County School District breaks in an effort to offer experiential learning opportunity to these students while they're not in the classroom. So Urban Roots just humbly requests that the state consider providing financial assistance to further our impact in our community through proven and effective comprehensive garden education programming to support our teachers, our students, and their families as we robustly fundraise on behalf of these families. Thank you.
Thank you.
See no one at the table in Las Vegas, BPS. Do we have anyone joining us on the phone?
If you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Joint Committee. This is Anna Binder. I thank you guys very much for explaining what happened between the other day and today. I was a little confused and backed off, but I'll stand by my statement that I did make the other day in the community that this is just amazing. Are there always ways to do more? I'm sure, but I think I'm very respectful that the decisions that this body has made over the last couple of sessions has greatly affected for the better our economic standing. And I entrust you guys that the decisions that you're making, that maybe even before this session ends or even next session, we're going to be in a much better spot. As I hear Mr. Daly say, I mean, what if the interest on that does come up and it's solid and we, are looking at $4 or $5 billion in the next session. So I thank you guys all again for all of your hard work and especially making sure that you explain things where I can understand them. I thank you very much and look forward to watching the continued work in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next caller.
Chair, there are no additional callers at this time.
Thank you. So members, with that, that's the last thing on our agenda, and this meeting is adjourned. Ways and means, however, your life continues.
Senate Finance, your life continues in 1214.
And we'll be going down to 3137.